What's up, gamers? My name is Sam Tech All Right, and you're listening or watching Tech All Talks, my podcast about esports and gaming. For this season, we're focusing on Counter Strike. I feel like I say this every single time at the start of these episodes, but there you go. I've said it again. sapphiRe is a name in Counter Strike that everyone should know, and if they don't, I don't know where they've been. She's been observing for years, one of the best observers. She's done some of the biggest matches. But not only that, before observing, she was a professional player in Counter Strike. She's had a voice in the community for such a long time, whether it be on social media, in the written form, on video. She's now also moving onto an analyst desk role. She has so much insights and experience. She was with Counter Strike in the beginning, before social media existed, before we were as big as what it is now. And that was why I wanted to speak to her, because she's forged this incredible path doing roles that maybe we don't focus on enough. I'm a big fan of observers. I'm quite loyal to them. I believe that they are the backbone of the game. And so instead of me telling you that, which I've just done, I thought I would get sapphiRe to explain her role as an observer and hopefully convince you to think the same way I do. For me, this is a huge honor getting to chat to you, because you've been in the Counter-Strike trenches. You started way back before any of us were really getting involved. You've stuck with it throughout, but maybe someone's jumped into the podcast and they're going, well, who's sapphiRe? So I think I don't normally like to ask this question, but I think your story is so interesting that we have to ask it. Take us right back to the beginning. How did you get into competitive Counter-Strike, and how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I probably started before a lot of people were born too. That's a harsh reality for me. I've been in esports now for 20 years. Um, Started like a lot of people where I just played video games casually. I loved GoldenEye, I loved Mario Kart growing up, but I never considered myself a gamer. I played multiple varsity sports in high school, and I was an athlete. I wasn't a gamer, and in those days, those were two very separate crowds. Um, had a knee injury, stuck at home for the summer, and my brother had his friends over, and they were playing Counter Strike in the basement on LAN. And being the competitor I was, I didn't want my brother to be better than me at something. So I started to pick it up very in secret. I didn't tell any of my friends. And we'd start to go to local lands and win a couple $100 here and there. And for a high schooler, that's amazing to win money from playing a video game. We went down to the CPL, the biggest tournament at the time for Counter Strike in Dallas. We made a whole family vacation out of it. Mom, dad, grandma all came. My brother and I really thought we were going to do pretty well. We lost 13 back to back. I maybe got a couple kills, but that was it. So it was a harsh reality, but it motivated me even more. So I played for many years. And I guess eventually became a pro player. I won an ESWC tournament, which is the biggest tournament for women at the time. That was in 2012. So I'm skipping many years, but it took a long time to get there. Played on a number of different competitive teams. I think the most known maybe like Evil Geniuses. I was on their CS 1.6 team for women. I also played on a lot of co-ed teams, more co-ed and mixed teams than actually all women's teams. Some that even played in ESL Pro League. Sorry, no, ESEA Pro League, which is now kind of the equivalent of ESL Pro League. But I did play in the top leagues, which a lot of people like that. Just there wasn't social media. There wasn't really Twitch. This is really dating me, but a lot of people say like, why aren't there women in the top leagues? Like I actually played in the top league with a co-ed team, but a lot of people don't remember that because that didn't exist. On the side, I was always working in social media, journalism. This little known app called Twitter came out in the late 2000s, and I thought, what if I go to tournaments and I start like a live blogging using Twitter? And so I'd go there for Counter Strike Source because no one was talking about that game. And I like to just do a lot of things. I always like to find opportunities of where people weren't talking about Counter-Strike, so I could talk about Counter-Strike and share the good word of the game that I love so much. So yeah, I've been in that for many years. Beyond that, I work at esports Team Dignitas. I founded a women's initiative called Radiant, where we run a lot of women's productions for esports. I'm an observer for Valorant and Counter-Strike. I'll actually be doing the Rio Major for Counter-Strike this year, which is very exciting. Um, and I also do some analyst desk stuff. So I did some for VCT Game Changers NA, and more to come on that.
I feel like it's such an incredible story, but you also, to me, it just, when you're saying it, I'm like, you're so humble about it because, like you mentioned, I mean, you were playing in those mixed teams in the big leagues before the whole concept of like women's initiatives and pushing that. You were doing that. And then I had Jason Baker on season 2. And I mean, he was bringing you up from a production point of view and saying like, just how you were right there in the beginning when they were producing these shows, figuring out how best to bring the game action to the screens. You've been on social media, so you've pioneered so many steps. Do you ever get tired from working this hard?
Oh, I'm constantly in a state of tiredness. Even before this, I was just talking to a coworker of like, I've got this podcast today, and then at 5 p.m. I'm talking with Galorans, which is a women's Valorant community. At 2 p.m. before that, I'm meeting with a production company, and later tonight I've got some rehearsals for another show that I'm doing. So I don't know, it's a lot, but I care so much about it. Like this is my life. I want to make a difference. I want to leave this world someday where someone says, "Yes, Heather made an impact on this community." It's still growing. There's so much more we can do, and it just excites me. It excites me because it's I love like traditional sports too. I'm a big fan of that, and I just see how impactful that is. My family's a big Green Bay Packers family, and we love supporting that team. And it's just like that's in our blood. Like we talk about it every family event, and I just want the same for esports. So I'm very passionate about it, and yeah, I don't think I'll ever give up. I don't get a ton of sleep, but that's okay. I'm on the grind. I sleep a lot on airplanes.
That helps. And you fly a lot, like you mentioned. You're heading to the Rio Major. You're going to be one of the observers. And I do feel like observers don't get enough credit because at the end of the day, you can take away the commentators, you can take away the analyst desk and the fancy stages. You can't take away the gameplay, which is what the observers bring us. And good gameplay, that's what you need. Everything else actually is just fluff because if the game is on the screen, people will be happy. How did you get into observing? I mean, how did you even find out that that was a thing you could do?
Yeah, I didn't know it was a thing for a while. A good friend, his name's Derek Trong. He's now an agent for a lot of the top players, but he worked at ESL. This was 2014, and ESL knew me very well because I was doing a lot of like written analyst articles about Counter Strike then. And they reached out and said, "Hey, we need an observer for our ESL Cologne qualifiers." I said, "What the hell is an observer?" I didn't know. And he's like, the person that pushes the buttons in the game. I didn't know that was a thing. I just thought that was done automatically. And I think it was. I think it was for most of the time. But as esports broadcasts have leveled up, people have realized the importance of it. So I gave it a try. Turns out I was pretty decent at it because again, as a pro player at the time, as an analyst, I was watching demos all the time. So I was always watching for what the most important things were happening and around. I seemed to do it pretty well. Went to a few events. Interestingly enough, it would have been I think it was Cologne 2016, where I was still kind of in the background. Like people like, okay, I kind of heard of this observer thing, but no one really thought much of it. And there's a very very famous clip of Simple on Cash winning this 1v2 where he's jumping out of sight heaven, and there's all these no scopes, and the observer wasn't on. They were on the two other players who both died. Neither myself or my co-observer Prius, even though there's a very famous twinner beam that Prius was the one that missed it. He actually didn't miss it. We weren't hired for the playoffs. We were only hired for the group stages. So we sat in the Team Liquid lounge, enjoyed some free drinks, and watched some Counter Strike, and it was a good time. But that play was missed. There's a lot of criticism about it, and then people say, "Wait a minute, okay, maybe observing matters." Um, and ever since there, then it kind of skyrocketed, and I've been traveling the world ever since doing that.
Well, this is the thing where you mentioned that about observing matters, because I still see it in a lot of tournaments where it is an afterthought. And I don't understand it because the commentators can only be as good as what they're seeing on the screen, right? And that's brought to them by the observers. I mean, and how much work goes into it, because you see this a lot at like these smaller events where there'll just be some random person who's like, oh yeah, I play Counter-Strike, I can observe. But actually it's a very nuanced, it's a nuanced skill as an observer, right?
Yeah, exactly. For example, I think a newer observer of a player that says, "Yeah, I play Counter Strike," they're gonna try to catch everything that happens, and you're gonna get nauseous watching because they're switching around so fast. It's not like when you're watching football game and there's a single ball. Like, no, there's action happening all over the place, and you only have one person controlling the camera. So there's a flow and a rhythm to it. There's a narrative that you want to tell. You want to show the T's and they're lining up their smokes. You want to show how the CTs are reacting to that. Then you want to show a free cam of how that execute is happening, and then you get into the action, and then you want to show the clutches. As I talked about in that 1v2, the most interesting thing could happen is Simple wins that round against two people while he's not the favorite, and so you always want to keep the camera on him. So there's a process to it, and it takes planning. It takes a lot of experience, because then you can understand different scenarios. As you get to learn the players, you get to know their tendencies. Like the always famous one was Stewie2K at his prime. Like, he always pushed through smokes. Normally we see smokes as walls and no one's going to move, but Stewie2K is going to go through those. So learning those habits is very important.
From what I'm gathering, I mean, and the way you speak about observing, and I think maybe it ties into what you said about the journalism and wanting to get on Twitter. You seem like a storyteller, and it's almost like you're wanting to tell a story with your gameplay.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we do describe our job as being an in-game director, in a sense. We're directing the story. The casters are the ones that add voice and emotion to that. And as you mentioned before, like you can have the best casters, but you can't do their job either. If we don't show them the information, you can hear the awkwardness in their voice when all these things are happening on the kill feed, and they don't see them. They don't know what's happening. And sometimes they'll call for a replay, and if you don't have a good backup observer, the replay is not there either. So all these pieces work together to make a beautiful story of Counter-Strike.
How exhausting is your job though? Like, so you mentioned now you're flying to Rio. You're obviously based in North America. You're going to fly to Brazil. I've seen the observing teams. You don't have, there's not a massive team. You're not sort of like rolling each other out and working on schedules. There's a very small group of you that have to work together. Those are mad long days. I mean, you mentioned you don't get a lot of sleep, but the stress as well to be that focused all the time. Do you think that being a pro player helps with that? Because obviously playing professionally, you were under the same sort of pressure to be that focused in the game.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to be long days. I grew up in the era where you play your first match at 10 a.m. and you play your next match at 1 a.m. They don't do that to players anymore. They don't torture them with those schedules. But that's the way I grew up as a player. We had brutally long schedules. And so, yes, I am used to that. Yeah, early mornings, because we're there for rehearsal, there for tech setup. Got to make sure everything works, and then we can have upwards of 4 BO3s. A lot of times we'll have another POV observer where we'll swap roles, and the other observer will essentially be like a replay observer, which is like you're watching the live feed and you're in like a delayed version of GoTV where you can pick up other things that the other person missed, which is, I guess, a little less stress, a little less focus on like staring at a radar intently. But yeah, it's still long days, but especially rewarding at LAN when you get to hear the crowd cheer in response to something you showed on screen. That always gets you hyped up and motivated.
Is it one of those things where it helps if you're working with a team of people you know? I mean, is that something the observers feel more comfortable with if you all kind of know one another? Because I'm presuming there's 10 different points of view at any given time. You're all got to be in communication all the time to figure out what's going to go out on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. And again, when I started, it was like one observer doing everything. We're very blessed now. Like for the Rio Major, I get to focus just on POV. We'll have a cinematic observer. Um, we'll have a TD, a technical director that's swapping between us, and we'll have a replay observer. So getting experience with that team, actually, like you get to communicate less if you already know what the other person is going to do. But if you're a new pair or a new trio, you're going to have to over communicate so you know when to show, when to swap, and you're not going to miss something that's really important happening because you're showing a free cam, for example.
How do you deal with the I've got to be very kind here because they're my coworkers, but some of the shoutcasters, if you like, the commentators, they can be quite vocal about the observing, and I've heard this a lot, and they feel necessary, if you like, to give some input into. I'm trying to do this in a very polite way, but let's just call them out. Sometimes they'll be like, oh no, the observer's just not good enough. They want to come down, they want to have a conversation, they want to tell the observers how to do their job. Do you deal with that a lot? I mean, how do you balance the egos of, you have a very stressful job, and then you've got the more precious egos as well who want to tell you how to do your job sometimes?
Um, I've been very fortunate, and I think it's because I'm proactive with the casters. I ask what they want. I get in front of it and say, like, if I miss something, hey, sorry, I did this. I think I would do this or X, Y, or Z next time in the situation. I like to sit in the green room with them and talk about what they liked, what they didn't like. Um, I ask for sometimes like subtle clues, like when you mention that someone's doing a flank because you see it on the radar, would you like me to switch to that or would you not? So I just have an open line of communication with them. And I've been very fortunate that as a response, I don't have any like sassy comments or anything from observers or sorry, from casters for the most part. So a good relationship, and that's also goes back to the same chemistry, just like you have with observers, doing the same with the casters too. Um, for example, Sadokist and Henry were a big pair. Like they had a very different way of how they call for things than others, and I respected that and I followed along. So yeah, all about open communication and just getting that experience event after event together.
This is why you've obviously been in the scene for so long, though, because I think that understanding of like all working together, because you all want to put on the best possible show, is what matters. There's also like a lot of negativity that sometimes comes along online. I mean, we're focusing on observers now. We'll talk about some other stuff as well. Is that sometimes frustrating? Because obviously you're also human. You might miss a particular play, and then you see now with the rise of social media, there's always someone who feels they've got to come on and add their 2 cents into how that was done. Is that a struggle? I mean, does it affect you, or are you pretty good at being able to compartmentalize that?
Pretty good, I would say. There's some days where it just gets to you. You're like, why? Like, I just don't understand the human desire to do that. Like I said, I'm a Packers fan. We're having a terrible season. I get upset. There is no part of my brain that says I should go on Twitter and message the quarterback and say, "Why did you do this, you stupid idiot?" Like, there's no part of me that says that. So I just can't comprehend it. It's fine to be frustrated. I've realized in life, not everyone is going to like you. It's impossible to make everyone like you. Um, but I just don't understand the need to message people. It's just so weird to me.
I had Sadekist on the last episode, and he was saying the same thing. Where he said, like, it's really weird that you're a pseudonym. No one knows who you are, but you feel the need to go online and just shout at someone randomly. But it is an interesting phenomenon, I suppose, in esports that exists. And I'm curious as well. And obviously, because we're both women, I think it's a conversation that has to be had. And I know people always roll their eyes at these conversations, but they're so important. I mean, being a woman in from an observing point of view, that for me is fascinating. You were playing in the mixed leagues way before it was a topic of conversation, but jumping into an observing role, that's not something you see very often, whether it be because we don't have enough women that have been playing and that are experienced enough, or maybe they don't know how to get into observing. But did you find that your gender closed any doors for you, or potentially was a problem going into it? Or do you think your reputation, kind of, everyone knew that, you were the real deal, you knew the game, so that wasn't an issue?
I think in the very early days, like there were some comments like, "Oh, she's a girl," like, yikes, or like shock when in the early days, they wouldn't necessarily post our pictures and talent announcements. And so years later, when my picture would come out in an announcement, like, oh, holy crap, like, can't believe that's a woman. I always used to run away from that. I'm like, do not mention my gender ever. It does not matter. And while it doesn't, but at the same time, like I realize that like the representation is important. And embracing that more. I've had so many people I'd run into in matchmaking games saying, especially other women saying like, "Wow, you're Sapphire the Observer. Like, really, really look up to you. I appreciate all you've done." Uh, I didn't know like I had people that looked up to me, and so I've embraced that more and realized the importance of it. I would confidently say like as far as observing, like my gender hasn't held me back. Maybe that's through just the fortunate that I built trust with a lot of the tournament organizers well in advance by doing other things with them too. Um, and then, yeah, in Counter Strike, unfortunately, I can't think of many other women observers. Starting to change in games like Valorant, Overwatch. There's a lot of programs for grassroots programs for developing more production talent, not just observers, but producers, replay operators, etc.
It's something that, like I said, I used to shy away from it because I was always like, I don't want the conversation to, I don't want to be speaking to a woman in the conversation to be around gender. But I do think, like you mentioned, there's so many young girls who are starting to get into gaming and feeling more confident and wanting to talk about it, who do look up to someone like you. I look up to someone like you where I'm like, wow, like the career you've built and only the good words that everyone has about what you've built and what you've done. That is inspiring, and I think it's an important one. And it's interesting that you brought up Valorant because this is a conversation that I find fascinating. You obviously you grew up in Counter Strike, like you mentioned, you loved the game. You're still in Counter Strike, but we're now seeing you very proactive in Valorant as well. What caused? I mean, because it wasn't a move, it was just I suppose you could say it was a growth. What caused that growth? What was it about Valorant that made you think, hey, this is somewhere I'd like to be as well?
Yeah, fortunately, I've gotten to see the game for many years before it even came out, so that that was fun. I've gotten to see it developed. I've worked with Riot. They hired me in advance of the game coming out to essentially be a consultant on the Observer tools, which was a great honor as well. Um, and I mean, the game, despite there's agents and a lot of different utility, like it still feels very similar. I love the pacing of games like Counter Strike or Valorant. um I'm going to relate it back to American football. I use this a lot, but like I like the pacing of those games where like every minute a new really really exciting thing can happen, and like you can almost always come back versus like I love League of Legends too, but like I can't tell you how many times I hear our teams or other teams or coaches like they'll see the draft and say, "Oh, well, that's it, it's over." What? That's impossible. So that's why I love the idea that you can always make a comeback in games like that. So it felt very similar to Counter Strike. I obviously love what Riot has done with Game Changers. They've been very closely connected with the community and different figures in the community, like myself, asking for feedback, creating all these different programs to support more women in the space. A couple months ago, there was a place in our Dignitas office with Riot. It was a Game Changers like Caster Academy program. And so just to see all those different things come together, supported leagues, which now Counter Strike has obviously followed with ESL Impact, which is wonderful. I love that like they keep one upping each other. It's good for both scenes in general. But there's just a lot to love, especially there's just such a younger demographic. Like I have a 9-year-old niece, and she's like, yeah, all my friends at school play Valorant. Most of those are girls too. I just think that's really cool. And it just shows that the game has a good future.
So it's obviously sensing that representation and drives for representation are really important to you. Does it get frustrating then with these different drives, like you mentioned, these different leagues that are coming up? Obviously, there's always the same comments, right? Where it's a bunch of people on the internet being like, oh well, why can't the girls play in the mixed leagues? Why can't they play in mixed teams? Which you've done years ago. Does that frustrate you to a degree where you look at this going, hold on, like I've been around probably longer than you have. I know what this is like. Sit down and shut up.
The comment that drives me the most mad is women are not as good as men. Just like collectively, we're gonna look at every single woman, we're gonna look at every single man, say, nope, the women, every single woman is worse. It's like, no, like the majority of people that I beat have beaten on LAN online over the last 20 years, and in my nightly matchmaking games, it's men. So that's to say, like, there are a lot of women that are better than a lot of men too. But like, it's just such a weird way to categorize this. And I like to just, my answer back is always it's a numbers game. The answer why you don't see women in the top leagues is because it's really, really, really hard to be a top player. I don't know what the percentage is. It's a fraction of a percent of players are top players in Valorant. And then there's obviously, at least historically, a much smaller pool of women. So when you take a fraction of a percent of a much smaller pool of women, you get someone like Cloud9 White Mel that arise. Okay, great. We've got like, that's our fraction of a percent. We just need to grow the pool of players first. And that's why these types of leagues and tournaments do a good job about growing that pool of players. And you compare Valorant and Counter-Strike to a lot of other esports titles, and we don't see a lot of representation because they don't have these grassroots events creating that pool. I feel like I don't want these tournaments to exist eventually. They don't need to exist because women are competing in the top leagues at the same percentages of men. And that's the end goal, but there's just like such a good stepping stone. And like the proof is literally in the player base and fan base of Counter-Strike and Valorant.
You are the GOAT observer. You've obviously you're pushing for diversity as well, but you've done so many other things. So like you mentioned there, your social media, your more journalistic side, that the getting on an analyst desk, because I've had a chance to see you as well. What would you say is your favorite role when you take a look at all of it, from professional, from playing competitively, observing, analyst desk, some of the work you do behind the scenes? What would you pinpoint and say this is my favorite part about my job?
Oh, that is tough. The free airline miles is pretty cool.
I can confirm.
Yeah, I at the end of the day, like I've done so many things, and they all get me excited, and they all cause me to lose a lot of sleep. But still, there's nothing that beats playing. There's nothing like playing on a stage in front of thousands of people, and they're cheering for literally you. It's an amazing feeling. Oh, when I'm feeling nostalgic, I'll go back and watch like videos from our ESWC 2012 win, where I literally just fell to my knees and I was crying on stage in front of thousands of people. That feeling can't be topped.
How difficult is it now? Because I mean, I know that you've also been through a stage of managing players, knowing what they're going through, and having lived it as well. Do you find it difficult sometimes to not get attached? Because I'm presuming from a management point of view, you need to be attached, but also there's an emotional investment that you can feel because you've been there and you've lived that. Do you find that quite difficult?
Oh, that's a great question. Uh, Absolutely. I've asked essentially to like move away from player and talent management because it's too hard. I get too attached. It's very difficult to make the tough decisions when I know they're sometimes the right decisions, because those players become my friends, because I become fans of those players. I bet in their footsteps before. Having to let a player go because they're underperforming is just like the worst feeling, because I've been let go before too, by teams that were my best friends, and it's the worst feeling in the world. So I don't like doing that, despite like I think I'm good at it in the sense that like I understand both the business side and the need, as well as the player side. But I don't like making those tough decisions. That's why I moved away from that and focused on like broadcast and production and marketing.
I like that. And that's another thing though. Obviously now you can do that, right? You can move, you can say, right, before, and I'm sure you know this, you were playing, that was what you did. You were either playing or you weren't. Now there's all these different facets to esports. When we talk about esports or even just a specific game, whether it be Counter-Strike or Valorant, you can be in production, you can be in marketing, you can be in team management. Do you think that the changes we've seen over the last few years, and I do think because you've been at the top of your game for so long, you're probably primed to answer this, these changes and how esports has changed? Do you think it's good for the scene, or do you think we're on a train to chaos very soon?
Yeah, it's definitely good. Um, you know that every industry is going to have its concerns, but for the most part, everything's really positive how it's trending. I just love that, as you said, there's career paths, there's real paths. Like you know, going to tell your parent you're going to be a pro gamer is it's a difficult conversation, and it's almost impossible. Like the reality is it's almost impossible to be a pro gamer. It's very, very difficult. But you can work in this industry in so many different facets, and it's not just the ones you expect, like managing and marketing and content, but legal and sports science, and there's team chefs and nutritionists. It's, almost every position you could think of, there is probably a gaming equivalent to that. Um, and these companies, they like to hire people that love gaming and they're passionate about it too. So you can take that love and find a real career path for it. And then, as they say, like you'll never actually work a day in your life because it just feels like I'm just genuinely excited to show up to work every day because I'm doing what I love. And these are things that I'd want to do anyways. And I was doing them anyways when no one was paying me for them. And now people pay me for them. I get to be paid to travel the world to do those as well.
Is it quite difficult though? Because I'm presuming, I mean, your family, obviously, like you mentioned, you were playing with your brother, so your family has been involved for a long time. But with friends and like personal lives, I know I'm just on the broadcast side, but the amounts of travel, it can be very taxing on like personal relationships, especially if those personal relationships are not necessarily people, maybe they're gamers, but they're not really people that understand esports. Have you struggled with that at all over the years, or is your circle really just esports fanatics, so you're sort of safe, if you like?
No, it's definitely been a struggle. You're early in my career. I never mentioned this, what I was really doing to people beyond I wasn't home a lot of the time. So that was hard. My parents have been great about like they always supported me, especially as long as you do well in school, you can do whatever you want with your free time. They didn't really get it, and they didn't see it as a career path until now. And now I can't tell you how many trips they're planning to come with me next year for esports events, and they love it. But on the friend side, especially the ones that don't necessarily understand it, that's been hard. Yeah, transparently, like I don't have as many close friends anymore that from high school, college, early work days, because I was always gone. I always had to miss important event. I've missed weddings before. Um, different baby showers, all these different things, because especially in the early days of esports, it's very cutthroat. Like as soon as you don't accept an observing role, they're going to find the next person that's probably going to work for cheaper, and then you're done. I mean, even today, like I got asked to an event over Thanksgiving coming up, and it's like, yeah, do I don't know what to do because this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, but family has plans already, so it's always a balance. Unfortunately, that is the sacrifice of not having like your traditional 9 to 5. But I've also met absolutely wonderful friends too that understand it, living the same grinding lifestyle as I am too.
I think that's the thing that, and the reason I asked that question is just because I think it's a conversation that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. It's not something that they see, so they might be looking into your world online, but they don't realize, like you said, you're missing weddings, baby showers, and you're ultimately a freelancer. So not pitching for a job is sometimes the biggest risk you can take because someone else can take that job, like you said, cheaper. That they're in there, and then after that it's really difficult to get your spot back, if you like. I mean, Have you felt that that's maybe died down the longer you've been in the scene? Obviously, you've got such a huge reputation now that you don't necessarily have to stress that much anymore. Or is it still something that's always in your head?
Yeah, at least on the observing side, like much better. Yeah, I haven't done an ESL Counter Strike event I think in 3 years. So when I got the message about doing the Rio Major, I was shocked. But it's proof that you know, if you do your job well, you know, people come back to you and hire you when there's a need. I feel like still on like the analyst end because that's still so new to me. I'm like, oh god, I gotta accept everything, you know. But obviously I built a bit of a reputation. So if I lose out on one thing, there's always going to be 10 more things, which is great. And that's not just like me saying I'm in a privileged position. I've had this talk with a lot of different observers, some that like desperately wanted to do an upcoming event and they weren't asked, and they said like, I think I'm going to give up. Like, I can't believe I didn't make this event. I'm like, you cannot give up. And the example I gave him was like ESL, you know, I didn't work an ESL CSGO event for years. And look, I'm doing the major now. I've done a number of other Counter-Strike events in between, so obviously kept up my skills, but like there's always going to be jobs in esports. There are so many different events coming up, and now there's like the high school and collegiate opportunities and paths as well. So definitely not worth giving up on just missing one event because there's going to be 10 more waiting for you.
I am curious when you decided to kind of get involved in Valorant, was that a worry that you may be having to walk away from Counter Strike completely? Because I know a lot of people, specifically from a broadcast, even a player position, you know, had to make that choice between the two games. Did you consciously think about that and go, there is a good chance I have to say goodbye to Counter Strike if I go down this path?
I was definitely worried. Um, Not just like the time commitment, but like, are the game companies rivals enough that you can't work with both of them? Yeah, I was certainly nervous. Yeah, a lot of people always think like, oh, you know, sapphiRe like disappeared from Counter Strike. Why'd she, you know, she gave up on Counter Strike. She moved to Valorant. Like, no, I accepted the jobs that came to me first. And that's just kind of how it goes. But yeah, it was a bit of nerves at first, but fortunately, it's been a great balance. Getting to work with the likes of Nerd Street and Riot, as well as ESL and Beyond the Summit. Like everyone has treated me wonderfully, and you know, I couldn't be more grateful for all the opportunities they continue to give me after, I don't know, 8 years doing this.
So I'm a little bit biased because my first love is Counter Strike. That's where I'm at. So I am so excited that you're going to be at the Rio Major. And a question that I love to ask everyone on this season, because it is all sort of Counter Strike aficionados and commentators and observers. Is there a moment when, especially from a Counter Strike point of view, where maybe you met a specific player or someone in the broadcast where at that moment you were like, damn, my job is pretty cool? Do you remember who that player was, or that person was in that particular moment?
I think the most memorable would have been um like meeting probably Neo, Force, and Get Right. Just like being the most legendary players. I was big fans of them in CS 1.6. Um, getting to meet them over the years. I think I got to know them better at E League, when like all the players were there for a couple months and everyone hung out at the bar together at night. Um, and it was, I don't know, I don't get starstruck often. Like it would take me a lot to be excited to meet like a celebrity, but I was very excited to meet those players. And now some of them are friends. I was able to even recruit two of them to Dignitas. But yeah, those were the most memorable for me.
It's so much fun because Get Right comes up a lot. And I've actually now been at two events and he's been there. And twice I've watched him walk past me. And I'm quite a fangirl. So I have no problem. Like the first time I saw Fallen, I was running over there for a selfie because I was like, this is really cool. Forest, I was all over it. Get Right is the one that I do not have the balls to go speak. I cannot, to this day, I cannot go up to him and be like, it's such an honor to meet you. And he's always at these events that I'm at. and I see him in the bar and I just stay away from him. I'm like, he's so cool. So I like that he keeps coming up because it's just a reminder that I've had 2 opportunities to meet him
Oh,
properly and I can't do it. But
oh, you gotta
everyone,
do it. He's the
wonder.
nicest person in the world. Nicest guy
Uh,
in the world.
that's the one where you're just, if there's one person where you're like, I do get starstruck and now I'm starstruck. Get right is the one for me. I do have one last question for you, and I like to end all of the episodes with this question. It's probably the toughest one, so I'll be curious to see how you answer. Why do you love Counter Strike?
Ooh, okay. Um, well, I did mention a bit. I'm gonna go a few different paths. One was the pacing of the game. Um, People can always come back, and I'm gonna tell like a little story about when I won that ESWC World Championship. Um, it was a BO3, and the first map, we were down 3-12 at halftime. And by the way, this was my first time on the team. They had won like 5 championships before I joined. So I'm like, oh god, I don't want to be the one that caused them to lose. We were down 3-12, and we won match in double OT. Next map, we were down 2-13. This was Inferno. We lost the pistol round on T side, so we were down 2-14. And I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna be the one that caused them to lose their 5-game, world championship streak. And we came back and we won. I think that one was triple OT. And I just love that, like, every minute and a half or whatever the timer is now, I don't even know, but you can always reset yourself, figure out a new strategy, figure out how to counter your opponent, outsmart them, and win and come back in what's like almost impossible situations because of not just like aim but smarts, and outsmarting a team. I just think that's fascinating about the game, and I don't see that in a lot of other titles. And then like the second part is just the pure nostalgia of this game. Like, I can't describe the feeling of like the early days, the early 2000s, when this was just like all so new. Nothing like this exists before. You're jumping into these matches. The feeling of like discovering new things, new strategies, new smokes. Nothing compares to those early feelings. Like, I could never recreate them in another game ever. It just has so much insane nostalgia, and you just really felt like you were part of something like absolutely special.
You've been listening to Tech Girl Talks, a podcast about esports and gaming. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can hit me up on social media at TechGirlZA. I've also put all of sapphiRe's social media in the description below. And please don't forget, if you have enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe on your chosen platform.